Hello and welcome to this video. I want to talk about how you would approach revising computer science. And because computer science isn't that different to any other subject, in all honesty, it's just going to be a general revision guide type video. So obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but on my channel I've got loads of videos on the content for computer science, but none about the process of how you would use the videos, if you know what I mean. So that's what we're going to look at now. Before moving on to the bulk of this video, I just want to say that we all understand that the best revision is going to be built up over a stretch of time. You're kind of ramping up incrementally, adding more notes to your collection, doing past papers, all this sort of stuff. I think we all understand roughly what good revision is going to look like, but it's worth saying that there's no too late time to start revising. That's something that not everyone does understand. So whatever time frame you consider too late, I'm doing that in quotes, it's fine. Even if your exam is tomorrow, that's okay. You've still got some time to revise and you'll still retain some information from going over your notes or my videos or whatever. You've still got time to revise essentially. And people are so focused on what everyone else is doing. Students often exaggerate their revision either in the positive sense or negative sense, like they'll say, oh, I've done no revision despite having done months of revision. So don't focus on what everyone else is doing. It's all about what you're doing, and don't ever give up is essentially my message. So whenever you're at in this revision process, whenever you're watching this video, you've got enough time before your exam to get some good revision done. It's worth saying that cramming does work for a lot of people, i.e. trying to get as much information in as possible. So when you've got a very limited amount of time, say just the evening before, or you've got a couple of hours before an exam, or maybe a day, small amount of time, not months in advance, cramming does work because you're just trying to retain as much information as you can. And it worked for me at GCSE especially. At A-level less so, or friends of mine especially found out the hard way that it doesn't work as much. It's more about your understanding. But for GCSE, a lot of it is about just your retention. So you can cover the whole GCSE computer science course in 4 hours, maybe less than that, by watching my videos. So really it's not impossible to cram, and if you didn't try then you'd never understand the effect really. And obviously it's important to look after yourself in that sense, because cramming implies to me something like Will from the In-Betweeners, if you've seen that, where he just goes crazy because he's staying up all night, having energy drinks and so on. So you've got to be very careful not to sacrifice your mental well-being or physical well-being in terms of sleep in order to stay up and cram. Or basically the whole message is don't burn out. So try and revise, do as much revision as you can, but don't cause yourself harm by doing it. It's more important you have a kind of clear mind going into an exam than being so stressed that it's not going to work out. But exams aren't fun, you're not going to enjoy it, you are going to be slightly stressed, but some stress is helpful in getting you focused and it shows that you care about what you're doing. So to summarise, don't ever decide not to revise because you don't feel there's enough time. It won't be worth it. It will be worth it, but don't ever push yourself over the limit where you're going to cause yourself some harm and it's going to affect your performance in the exam by going too far essentially. So if you have got an exam imminently and you're putting off revision by watching this video, go and do that now, stop watching. The rest of this is going to be about techniques, and I'm going to show you some of my notes from GCSE and A-level and evaluate them, and also just some specific stuff for computer science exams. So the rest of this video is not going to be as useful if you have got an exam imminently. There are a few specifics which are really important before you can move on, first of which is your exam board. So you should really have a mental list of every subject you're taking and the associated exam board. So for example, OCR for art, AQA for PE, and so on. So you need to have all your subjects with the exam boards nailed on. If you don't know what they are, make sure you ask your teacher or see if it's referenced on maybe your VLE or your school's website, somewhere where it will have information about all your subjects. That's really important. Also, it's important that if you are revising a particular exam, you're clear on what exam that is in regards to the course. Most subjects have multiple exams and computer science has 2, so you need to know which exam you're actually wanting to revise and make sure you separate the total content for that. And a third, maybe less obvious point, is you've got to be careful if you use resources made for old courses. So you've got to bear in mind that the GCSEs and A-levels get refreshed every few years. There are previous courses, they had slightly different contents, even if it was the same exam board, so be a little bit careful. So if you are doing GCSE computer science, you want to look for from 2016, that was when it was first taught, September 2016, or 9 to 1. Previously they were on the A star to U scale, so now they're 9 to 1. And also for A-levels, it was from 2015, they were slightly earlier. And if you see A2, that is too old. If anything referencing A2, like a textbook, A2 was what the exams at the end of year 13 were called when it was more modular. Now it's a different type of course, so they're no longer called A2 exams. So to be crystal clear, any resources, any exam papers that were before these dates, 2016, 2015, depending on which one, They're kind of red flags, as are any courses labelled with computing. So all computer science courses are called computer science courses now, with the exception of BTECs, which are still called computing. But the old A-levels and GCSEs were called computing, so that is a red flag as well. But the exception to the resources made before the years is that obviously the textbook needs to be published before they were first taught, and teachers may have made resources. So that's a slight exception, but if it was, say, 2009, that's clearly going to be for an old course which isn't applicable to you anymore. Even if it may still be useful, you've just got to be a little bit careful. And using that information, so for example AQA 9-1 GCSE Computer Science, you should be able to Google that and find the correct exam board specification. So this is a document which is on the exam board's website, and this has loads of information in. It's kind of like an advert for teachers. So when a teacher is deciding what exam board to enrol their students in, they need to decide which one is most appropriate for them. So it has loads of information. The subject content part of it is what's really useful to students. So it tells you what topics are in each paper first of all. So this is from an AQA A-level specification. So it tells you that topics 10 till 13 are in paper 1 and the rest are in paper 2 and so on. So that's really useful when you have to decide which you're actually revising, paper 1, paper 2. And also for each topic it tells you exactly what you need to learn. So it has bullet points of each subtopic, I suppose. And AQA are even really good, and they give you additional information. Like this is you need to know what an algorithm is for this, and it gives you the definition for an algorithm. And other specifications are similar, so they give you lots of useful information. But the most important is that it tells you what you need to learn for this exam. So it's really important when you use resources you're sceptical of them. You don't assume they are for your course or they're perfect. You've got to make sure you check they match the specification first and then make an assessment on how useful they would be to you. So clearly every computer science course is going to be vaguely similar. They all have the same key topics. There's not going to be a random topic on geography in them. They're all going to be vaguely similar, but they do have differences. So if you revised AQA instead of OCR, you would be in some trouble. You'd be okay for maybe 60% of it, but the 40% of it is going to be completely different. So that's going to be an issue. Every year I get someone asking me the night before the exam, I've revised Edexcel, turns out I'm doing OCR. Is that a big deal? Well, it is kind of a big deal. You've got to make sure you find that difference in content which is between the two. And often I feel that people are a little bit blinded by the fact that it says on a textbook it's endorsed by the exam board. That's not necessarily an indication of quality. Often they're written in like 2 months because they need to be rushed because they're introducing a new course. And often they're produced by the same company that owns the exam board. So for example, Pearson is a big publishing company. They often make textbooks, often for their own exam board, which is Edexcel. And that could be perfect. You might see that as a good conflict of interest, but just be a little bit careful. Don't assume they're perfect because they have the exam board's logo on them. You want to have some healthy skepticism, and it encourages you to look at the specification, which is really the whole point. The same can apply to what you've learned in class. You may have had no teacher and learned no stuff. That happened to me, but you can still get top grades just by working that extra bit harder. Or you may have learnt too much. Your teacher may have introduced advanced topics, which is great, that's perfect. But when you're revising, you want to just revise what's necessary. You don't want to waste time revising something which isn't going to come up in your exam. So you want to actually be skeptical, obviously be respectful of what your teacher's teaching you, but just bear in mind that at the end of the day, it's you that's going to have to sit that exam. So really, there's a perfect amount of revision that covers everything in the specification. Then there's too little and too much. So it's kind of like the Goldilocks principle. You want just the right amount of revision. You only have finite energy. So those slides were kind of a prelude to the main focus of this video, which is all about revision. So when you're revising, you really want to have several resources to work from, and you want to overlap them so that you can cover the same topic from a few different angles. So for example, you might have videos like mine, or also crash courses, which are much more exciting and have a higher production quality, but they're not tied to actual A-levels or GCSEs. They're just generic ones for a wider audience. So be aware that they are not what you need to know potentially. So that's where you've got to have a little bit of skepticism. Also, you've got the textbook, perhaps the exam board endorsed one. Maybe you've got university textbooks, web notes, maybe from BBC Bitesize, and of course you've got your teacher, which is a great resource. Those are the most obvious ones, and maybe more of course. So if you're creating notes, it's really good to try and combine them, try and use information from several sources. Maybe it would fill in any gaps that one of the resources has. Another resource will kind of take over in that regard. And crucially, when you don't understand a concept in a textbook or in one of my videos, make sure you try and research it to understand it. That's often what differentiates top students and students who don't get as high grade, because the top students are really trying to work out the areas they're weakest at, whereas the not so good students are kind of content with not knowing everything. They just want to get through the exam. If you really want to get the top grade, especially at A-level, you need to go above and beyond in terms of your understanding. If you can explain a concept to someone who doesn't understand it, then it shows you've really understood it yourself. So if there isn't a resource to use, maybe there isn't one for your exam board specifically, then you might want to think a little bit outside the box and try and find something like a university textbook. So for example, if you don't understand the topic of networking, could search for the best networking textbook on Amazon maybe, and see if you can find a PDF of it or go to your library and take it out. Because you've got to bear in mind, university modules, they start teaching from scratch at the start of year one. They're basically teaching GCSE stuff, then A-level stuff, then standalone advanced stuff in the second and third years. So the textbooks are written to a level which will be useful for you in GCSEs or A-levels. So that could be a good resource. There's loads of PDFs of textbooks online, and also lecture slides and so on may be publicly available, and some lectures may be available on YouTube. So now I thought it might be useful to show you some of the notes that I've managed to dig out from this is A-level actually, this is A-level biology, this is A-level physics. So one of the things I used to do was to print out a specification. And so this is, you can see the subject content part, so it's got the topic names and the actual subpoints for each. And the night before the exam, I'd annotate it. So basically, I'd go through the specification, or specifically, so the specification is maybe 100 pages long, and the subject content part is maybe 5-10 pages long. So I'd go through and annotate it with notes. So for example, it's kind of small, but so there's an equation here. I've actually said what the equation is. So maybe I've done this alongside a textbook or previous notes I've had. And what I would do, I did this for almost every subject, but I do this the night before the exam. It would maybe take a few hours, and then the morning of the exam I would read it on the way to the exam, so on the bus, in the car, stood outside the exam hall, and then I'll just bin it because you can't really do much else with it. So obviously these two, the fact that they remain here is because I've didn't do that, so I don't know why exactly, but it's a good example to show you. So this is a bit of an extreme. I don't know anyone else who's actually done this technique. This is a technique I sort of just developed myself because I realised how important the subject content part is. So it's really useful in terms of evaluation. It means if you do it the night before the exam, you've got one last chance to go over everything needed. So a few times I realised I hadn't revised a topic, or I missed off a few bullet points, I didn't understand an equation, something like that, and it actually paid dividends. So it came up in the exam basically, otherwise I wouldn't have kept doing this method if it didn't work. But it is a little bit tedious, so I do understand that it takes a few hours, it's not very fun, and it's not as applicable for some subjects. I actually found it was really useful for maths. There's not a lot of notes you need to write, but you can write equations or techniques or whatever for maths, but some subjects it may not be as appropriate, but I found it to be quite useful. And actually starting at A-level I did my maps. I didn't really do it at GCSE. My revision at GCSE was a bit all over the place, to be honest, and generally speaking you get better at revision as you go along, which should be expected, so don't worry too much if you don't really know what's going on at GCSE. It's a learning experience all round. But at A-level I did my maps, so I kind of just did different colours with the textbook. I would just take bits of information, maybe this was from a video possibly. I watched on economics, did a few notes. So this is a big topic and this is just a single subtopic which is maybe more appropriate. So these are useful, and I definitely think they're more usable than written notes. So really, if you are going to do notes, make sure they're going to be usable for you down the line. Don't just do them because it seems like you're, something to do maybe. Make sure you're actually going to use them, because a lot of the notes I made I never actually used. So I definitely feel that my maps are quite useful, especially if they're in colours and you can highlight bits and underline important aspects of it, so that might be good. And they are good for essay subjects as well. So computer science isn't an essay subject per se. There are longer mark questions, so there are definitely some topics which are more appropriate for this than others, but it's obviously down to you. The downside is that it's very easy to waste time doing this, because you want to make it look nice or whatever reason. That was definitely my issue. I'd want to make it look nice, which is ironic because they don't look nice at all. But I don't know, with written notes, when you're doing just a standard page of written notes, I guess you don't care as much about the colours and how everything's fitting together, so maybe that was an issue. So these notes are from watching my GCSE science, which kind of inspired me to do computer science because no one else was at the time. And I would basically watch a video and make notes from that video. So this could be what you would do with my videos, but I think doing it on a computer is not as good, especially because I just copied notes in from him, which defeats the point. A lot of people ask me for the slides to use or handouts or notes from my videos, but really the process of doing notes should be you doing the notes in your own words. If you just copy what I've said or what the slides say, you're really not ever going to process that information, or you are. So this was, I think I did this in maybe February, so super early, but I never used it and I never really processed it because I was kind of like, okay, down the line I'll use this, but I never did. So the equations and so on. I also did it for a textbook. This is for chemistry, a chemistry textbook, again copying information which I never understood. I just put it there and left it because it felt like I was revising really early, even if it wasn't very useful. So I personally prefer doing handwritten notes. I think you have to understand it slightly more, and you don't have a temptation to copy and paste stuff. It's very easy to copy and paste stuff on the computer. Obviously you can't do that when you're actually writing it. So it can be fairly detailed. That's an advantage. With these notes, you haven't got, it's not like a flashcard where you can only put so much space in. You've got enough space to write all the notes, and they're mostly copied from a textbook, so clearly that's not good at all. I'm never actually processing information, and often textbooks include unnecessary details, so I definitely wasn't cross-referencing this with a specification. I only knew about a specification midway through my GCSEs actually, so I didn't even know from the start what it was, let alone how to use it. So often textbooks, they've got to fill 200, 300 pages, whereas in reality, if they did it as concise as possible, it would be maybe 50 pages. So they need to drag it out essentially, and that maybe means including details you don't need to know, which is probably reflected in these notes. And these are the final notes I found, just pages of written, boring physics notes. So they are comprehensive. I was using the textbook and using specification at this point to go through and cover every point, but they're very boring to make and revise from. It's just a wall of black text essentially with a little bit of highlighting, but that's not going to be too helpful. Again, I don't think I ever used these. I never printed them out. I don't know, handwritten notes I think are definitely the way forward, but everyone's different of course. Okay, so that's what I did. Now let's look at what you could do for computer science. So I'd recommend you print out a specification, or really the subject content part of it. The whole document is so long, don't bother with the whole document, just the subject content part, the bullet points that tell you what you need to know, or just have it up on your screen, it's up to you, but as long as you use it, that's fine. And if you are looking to revise for an hour, 2 hours, just target revising a specific topic, so hardware for example, and maybe watch my videos on that topic. So find the playlist on my channel and watch the videos for that, or however you want to do it. And if you are revising the night before, just watching the videos is a good way to cover everything. I mean, they do cover everything. So if you just watch the videos, you can get really good grades. Some people never bothered doing notes or flashcards, all that stuff. They just watch the videos the night before. And that works for GCSE in particular, not so much for A-level, although it would help a lot. So anyway, if you are doing it months in advance, you can kind of expand on this by maybe making a mind map based on that topic, and maybe rewatching the videos if you need to get more notes, or use another resource like a textbook. And going back to the actual subject content, you're going to make sure you can confidently tick off all the specification points that you've covered. You don't want to miss any out. If you start missing them out, you're going to forget about them and leave them out. So don't leave off one point in a topic, just cover everything, and then you won't forget and won't miss stuff out. And then maybe you want to convert some notes to flashcards, to definitions maybe, or things you're going to forget. So physical cards where you just cut out and have one thing on the front, one thing on the back, or just have an app on your phone to do it, which is what I personally do. So using that suggested workflow, which is of course suggested, you've got your points you want to cover. You find the corresponding videos for those points. So you've got the special purpose registers video here, which covers these points here, and there'll be other videos that cover the others as well. And then you convert this into a mind map potentially, so the CPU being kind of a central point and branches coming off it. So the other aspects of the CPU you need to know about, like the bottom stuff here, the components, might have a different branch. And then you maybe want to convert some of this stuff to flashcards, which you'll use. So maybe this, you print it out, or you have an app on your phone, as I say, and this would be something which you're likely to forget, like the definition for the program counter. And as I said earlier, if you can overlap this information by using other resources, try and do that. Maybe just reading the Wikipedia page of the registers, or looking up it in the textbook or other videos, whatever it is, to consolidate this and obviously go back to it at some other point. So have a mental note in your mind to go back and do the flashcards, or look over the mind map, or whatever. Just a few more specific points on computer science then. So usually there are 2 exams, and one is more written and one is more application based, but you still have to have learnt theory for both of them, especially the written one of course, but the application one has still got theory questions within it, as you'll see if you do past papers. So that's really important. Often people ignore the application, or they ignore revision for the application based exam because they assume the whole thing is just problem solving. It's not. A lot of it will be, but there are still going to be theory questions within it. And on a similar theme, you don't have to be a good programmer in order to get top marks in computer science. Programming is just one topic of computer science, and so that means you have professors of computer science who don't know how to program, or they are very bad at programming, and I've encountered them. So that's absolutely fine. you do need to have understood and learned programming theory, which is different. So programming is the actual practical aspect of it, and programming theory is the theory aspect of it, obviously, and they're completely separate. So they are two distinct things. So make sure you revise programming theory. Often people who aren't very good at programming do better at this aspect of the exam because they've actually put the effort in to learn it. Computer science is a very mathematical subject, so people assume there aren't going to be any longer mark questions. You do have to do quite a lot of writing often in these exams, so essays and algorithm questions are often worth quite a few marks, and there'll be a video on how to approach these as well. And generally it's really important you do past papers as part of revision in order to get a feel for the format and also gauge where you are in the revision process. You get the past papers from the exam board's website, and make sure you do them in exam conditions or as close as you can to be in exam conditions. So if it doesn't have a calculator, don't use a calculator, turn your phone off, don't be distracted by anyone, that sort of stuff. And then use the mark scheme to actually check your answers, and the mark scheme is a really good resource to use because it tells you basically model answers, and every few years they have to start repeating questions because there's only so much stuff they can ask. So that's a good way of taking in information and working out your weaknesses. And then using grade boundaries if they do exist. In the first year of courses there aren't any grade boundaries, but after the first year there are grade boundaries you can use to actually see what grade you would have got if you'd set this mark for real. And don't rely on grade boundaries, that's an important point. People often ask how many marks do I need to get an A star? Well, you don't ever use that way, because first of all, grade boundaries are worked out after everyone sits the exam, so there's no way of knowing in advance what the grade boundaries are going to be. But if you aim for, say, 80%, that's a very risky strategy to have because you're only going to learn 80% of the content. It's okay to have it in the back of your mind that you don't need to get full marks and you can relax a little bit, but always try and go for 100%. Never try and... you're kind of on a slippery slope if you start to backtrack and go, okay, I can settle for 60%. You want to really be aiming for full marks. Obviously, to do past papers, you need to have a bit of time. So if you are revising, say, last minute, it's still good to have a look at the papers. It only takes 20 minutes to go through a paper if you're not actually answering any questions. Have a look at the questions, see if you had an answer you could write, and if you don't, have a look at the mark scheme and see what the examiners say is the answer, because that's really important to understand. So you can still do this by just looking at the past papers. If your course hasn't got many past papers, maybe it's in its infancy, you could look at old courses or different exam boards. You've got to be very careful, of course, because you need to filter the information based on the specification, but it does give you more questions to practice from. Just to wrap up with a few do's and don'ts then for revision, so make sure you do make usable notes and then actually use them. So first of all, that means you're making notes that you think your future self is going to use, and then honour that agreement with your past self and actually use them when the time comes. But when you are doing notes, don't copy them directly. Make sure you rewrite them and make sure you process and understand them when you are doing it. Notes shouldn't be just for yourself down the line, they should be useful as you're doing them as well. As I've just said, make sure you do past papers in exam conditions and then spend time marking them as a proper teacher would or examiner would, and then convert any answers which you didn't know to flashcards, notes. So kind of loop back and add stuff to your notes as you go along and learn more. Do revise during the exam period and between exams. Of course, take breaks, but you'll be surprised how many people don't actually do much revision during the exam period. And make sure you take enough breaks. Get outside, exercise, eat properly, watch TV, films, whatever makes you happy basically. And this is the point which I definitely fell short of, because in my mind I was sort of like, well, I've got a month of exams, I can deal with a month, that's fine, I don't have to do any exercise for a month, I've got the whole summer off, I can make up for it. But it's about your kind of state of mind in the process of it. It's important to have breaks and give yourself some time to kind of relax as well. So that is for sure the point I was worst at out of all this advice. And on a more negative note, try not to get distracted when revising. So I got in a very bad habit of listening to music and watching YouTube videos. I've got several monitors, as I'm sure a lot of you do, so I'd have revision on one screen and YouTube on another screen, which is pointless because I just get so distracted and never get anything done. I'll check my phone all the time, check my emails all the time. So what I would do is I'd use first of all a technique called Pomodoro, I think that's how you pronounce it, and this is where you set a timer for 25 minutes and work solidly in that time, and you write down any distractions in that time, and then you've got 5 minutes off after that 25 minutes to check Twitter or whatever you want to do, then you're back on another 25 minutes, so you're kind of on that loop. And also I would block websites that distracted me, and I'd delete apps off my phone. That's how addicted I was to these websites and so on, so that could be a useful way of making sure you stay focused. It's not fun, but it's really useful. Also, don't ignore difficult topics or subjects. That's something I did. I would do the subjects that I enjoyed or revise the topics that I knew so I'd feel good, but actually the difficult stuff should get the most attention, and they should be done first. So if you find networking a really hard topic in computer science, make sure you revise that first. Another thing I definitely did sometimes was spend more time planning revision than actually doing it. So I'd do nice timetables, I'd jot out my day, but actually I'd end up spending more time doing the timetables than actually revising, and I would miss deadlines I set for myself. So basically it's about actually doing the work rather than doing all the kind of organisation that goes with it. And as I've said throughout, don't let yourself burn out where you just have no motivation, or you're really bored, or you're unhappy. Try and balance your mood and your energy levels. Exam periods are all about endurance. You have lots of exams in quite a small amount of time. It's about balancing them, and as soon as you leave an exam, forget about it, move on to the next one, and just keep your energy levels up. Exams are pretty miserable, you've just got to get through it, and then you have a long summer off. And finally, on a similar point, it's easier said than done, but try not to get too overwhelmed. Exams are important, but they're really not the end of the world. Things, in the worst case scenario, say the exams went awfully, you'll be fine. That's happened to me a couple of times. I've had a few bad exams and it's really got me down, but things have always worked out and things get better over time. So don't worry too much about it. Do your best and things will work out. So that's all I have to say really. I tried to give as much advice as I could. Hopefully it was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. And if you have any techniques or advice you'd give other people, leave a comment. It'd be interesting to read. And apart from that, I hope revision goes fantastic, as do the exams. So thank you for watching and good luck.